is Jessica Crow, and I'm the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights, which is a podcast all about change, how we lead through change, how we influence change, how we manage and facilitate behavior change. And today's guest here with me today is Douglas Scherer. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Hopefully I did. Perfect. All right. So Douglas is a keynote speaker, a facilitator, an author, a professor at Columbia University. I am so excited to have him here on the show today. He wrote a book called F.O.R.G.E.D, 6 Practices of Great Leaders in Volatile Times. And this framework really stood out to me for a few different reasons. The framework F.O.R.G.E.D, I'm going to read it really quickly, and then I'm going to have Douglas introduce himself in more detail. It stands for favor compassion, own the unexpected, recast ideas, go with intuition, employ action communications, and drive community bonds. And as change leaders, all of those things are so important for what we do in our practice and profession. But Douglas, before we get into that, can you share a little bit more about who you are, kind of how you got to where you are, and what maybe the origin story for F.O.R.G.E.D was in terms of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. For the opportunity to talk about it. Who I am. So I've been consulting and working as in several different hats as a university professor in leadership, and also in IT as an IT leader. But the thing that really touched me, and kind of the pivot point moving from IT into moving into the human-centered components of leadership, was when I started in my own consultancy to be put more and more not in the role of like dealing directly with the technology people, but being a person who just seemed naturally to be able to talk to executives. So I hadn't really started out to kind of move towards that direction, but just because I guess for some reason I enjoy talking with folks, I got put in front of them. And I think one of the most telling ones was an organization where I was just asked, hey, can you go talk to, Joe, whatever his name was. And he's an executive, and he's been trying to get this analytical thing going for 3 years. For 3 years, working with the IT department, couldn't get it done. And can you just go talk to him? And what I found was he's just trying to describe to me in the language of the screen, which was built 10 years ago, what his new brilliant business idea was. And it's not there. I mean, it's not in the screen. And every time the IT department came up, they were like, well, we can shift this field, we can shift. No, the field he needs is not on the screen. So I told him, turn off the computer, stop pointing at the screen, and you tell me, don't even draw a diagram or anything. Just tell me, what is the business problem you're trying to solve, where you're trying to get to, and why you want to do it. The whole tenor, the whole feeling of the room changed, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of trying to figure out how do I solve this problem, he's explaining to me in, almost like joyful liberation of like what he's trying to get done and why and what a great idea it is. And so now I've got a person in front of me who's totally opened up. Right. And then I'm able to say, okay, now still don't turn on the screen. There's a whole model of learning. So my doctoral research is in organizational leadership and learning. So it's a lot about learning and opening mindsets. And, there's a portion of it, we all learn and express ourselves in different ways. He was not going to be able to express himself in the way of that screen. I said, just leave it off. Just draw diagrams. Don't even make it a screen, just start sketching things that kind of represent what you want to get done. It starts moving into, the bottom line is all this guy wanted was a quarterly year-over-year report. Right? That's all he really wanted if you get down to it. I don't know why it couldn't be expressed. But so he started just drawing pictures and stuff, and then we started bringing that into what does the dashboard look like. And then I just took that to the technology business analyst, and I said, this is what we want. And she goes, yeah, all the data's in there. I can make this. It took like 3 weeks later, maybe a month later. I'm walking. It was this giant 2-floor organization. I was upstairs walking by the boardroom, and he's standing in the doorway, and he's holding the report, and he's shouting my name down the hall. And I was like, this could be bad or this could be good, you know? And he's like, I can't believe it. They totally bought into my strategy. I mean, the you know, all the analytics helped me, you know, present the thing. And I'm like, this guy spent 3 years because no one was listening to him. They were trying to push a solution. And so that really was one of the key things that kind of opened me up to this idea of like, we really have to look at the human-centered components to make an innovative change environment, but also just to treat people well. I mean, so the human-centered piece, I mean, the you know, the forged letters are really expressing kind of a very human-centered way of leadership, opening mindsets, and helping people perform their tasks.
The two that stood out to me that I really liked from that, and that's a great story and example of how when you sort of shift your approach and mindset and thinking to focus on humans, you get a totally different outcome in a much shorter time frame too, which was really neat. But favor compassion and go with intuition, and those are two that I am very closely aligned with, and they resonate and also very challenging in practice, that compassion piece especially. And as leaders, you know, the question comes up like, well, how do you lead with compassion? What does that mean exactly? So maybe in your words, if you were to describe what favor compassion is all about, I'd love to, you know, to hear how you're thinking about it.
Yeah. And the two stories in the book are very powerful stories. I'll just give you a quick overview of those. One is of Sunil Notani, who had taken over this role in a major corporation of doing transformational change. I mean, that's what he was hired to do. And he had his first like big meeting with the upper ups, and the person who had brought him in, his supervisor, was expressed very negative attitude towards the whole thing and kind of got on his case in a public sphere.
Yeah.
And he used that opportunity as an opportunity. Like, he could have, you know, just gone into anxiety or depression or whatever you do, but he actually used that as an opportunity to reach out to people and to say to them, I'm sorry you had to be involved in that, or listen to that. How can we work together? How can I help you? So there's a bit of equanimity in there as well with the compassion, which is, you know, I want to help you. I want to bring peace to the whole thing. And as he reached out to individuals, he started building his network, right? And then he created a group. So based on that hard time and that, you know, that kind of critical moment, he actually created unity, right, through that, versus creating, he could have brought a lot of anger and resentment to the whole thing. The other story in there is Loda Kronberg, who was the executive VP and producer of a major motion picture animation film. Some of the animators and the director were in India, and unfortunately the director took his life on the night before he was going to come back to London. And so suddenly, you know, she has and this can happen. I mean, you know, I mean, hopefully that doesn't have too much, but the idea of crisis in a project and the emotions along with it. So she had to deal with the emotional components of that. She actually was responsible for bringing him back and, you know, informing the family but she still had a project to do. Right. So how do you bring that team together? Now the team, it's a remote team, doesn't have a leader. Those animators were not trained to be directors and to kind of create that thing. So a lot of what she had to do, and again, in a learning environment, an organizational learning environment, to me, listening is the key thing. Like, even with that gentleman who I spoke about at the beginning, listening. And that in design thinking now, the empathy component is like the listening component. So it's kind of been formalized in that. But, you know, so much of what she did was listen, let's get it out there. We still have a job to do, but let's talk about this on a personal level. Then now that we're together, let's bring that to the professional level. And how can we make this thing happen, right? Again, bringing folks together through, you know, kind of a crisis moment, and using that as a unity moment. From a personal level, I just recently had an experience. Well, about a year ago, I had spine surgery. And it was extremely painful, and I was up on the spine ward spine surgery ward, and it's all people who have spine surgery, so it's all people in extreme pain.
Yeah.
And I mean, luckily there's morphine and all kinds of other things to help, but it's still pretty tough. And down the hall from me, just it seemed like unending. There was a woman just screaming in extreme pain. It just seemed like it was ongoing, and
which can make a difficult situation even harder.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So exactly. So I started focusing. I mean, I was so focused on myself. It's like, I can't take it anymore. Oh, what can I do? There's no way to make myself feel better about this. I can't take any more morphine. I can't sleep. I'm flat on my back without a pillow for days. It's weird. You're not allowed to move, and having food dribbled in your mouth. And so the shift I made, and it just kind of hit me at one point. Is like, what if I use some of the F.O.R.G.E.D stuff, and bring compassion to her rather than just trying to solve my own problem of anger and frustration and pain. And two things happened. And I think it's a great lesson for change management and leaders too. I mean, I think we can extrapolate it. Is that one, the pressure for me to be fixed, and to fix my situation left. Right. So it's a whole level of downgrading the stress, which, in mindfulness, you call that like the second arrow that hits you. So you're in pain. If you're in chronic pain, for example, and you're constantly going, oh my God, or why did this happen to me? And you start getting into that rumination part, that's called the second arrow, because you're shooting it at yourself, right?
Right.
So because the pain's still there. So kind of the same thing, that my pain was still there. But that stress of having to remove all this other thing that was going on is now greatly reduced, because now I focused on helping somebody else. Now my focus is out there. And the other thing that happened, which was very strange and a little scary, is that like it seemed with like in minutes, suddenly she was quieted down.
Yeah.
So I brought compassion.
The good vibes.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and you hear a lot of talk about resonance in an organization. I really feel it connects to that idea of resonance. Yeah. It's like now we're resonating not on I'm resentful, 10 people on the ward are resentful, no, why can't it stop? Which is a whole different level of resonance. You're resonating at that frequency of anger and frustration and pain versus I'm going to resonate at the frequency of let's just bring compassion to everybody on this ward and let's all send our compassion there. It's, it's a form of loving kindness as well, but it connects. So, and the third thing is it connects you.
Yes.
Right. So now instead of me being alone, oh my God, and I was alone in this room, for days on end, and you feel isolated. I mean, you do have nurses, but now you're connected with all us. We're now connected, right? That's the resonance is connecting us. I think in change management, when you can connect in that way, you're really creating an environment that's going to move forward together.
Yeah.
Right. So you take the stress off yourself, you bring everybody together, and then you all move forward.
That's right. Well, and I mean, those are wonderful examples and tragic examples as well of just how compassion for ourselves, how compassion for others can really, it's vital for not only the individuals that we work with, but our own thriving. I don't know if it's Thich Nhat Hanh or who was talking about compassion is recognizing our shared suffering. And sometimes when we're experiencing pain or change, we suffer because it's requiring us to experience something that we may or may not want to. And so having that compassion for yourself can alleviate that pressure, that stress, which accompanies the suffering. And then I like how you're talking about resonance, that vibe, that experience that you're sending out into the organization. There's a lot of stress in many organizations. It can be the workplace is probably the biggest source of stress for many people. Mm-hmm. So keeping in mind how to practice compassion for oneself and for others can shift and, change an experience is really powerful.
Yeah, it's magical, and it's a practice. But I'll tell you, I was doing a keynote for 200, 300, I don't know, technology folks at a technology conference. And as part of the idea of creating this talk was on engaging and being productive. And part of that is I talked about creating a pause,
Yeah.
a space where we can feel centered and then use that as a foundation to be creative and move forward. And so I actually did like a meditation with them, right? But in when you're trying to lead a group in meditation, one way is to kind of settle yourself in and
Yeah.
then connect to everybody. And it seems, and I was able to, I just thought it's just so amazing. So I've got all these tech folk, and I kind of had riled them up a little bit about engagement and let's get rid of surveillance and this kind of stuff, and then settle them down.
Yeah.
And I had the whole room kind of closing their eyes, grounding, feeling their feet on the floor for a couple minutes, opening your eyes and try to retain that, and the whole room is in a
The energy
completely,
probably lifted. Yeah.
yeah. And what did I do? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a leader can do that. I mean, it's better if you're trained so you kind of know how to kind of handle it. But you can be trained. I mean, you can do it just by centering yourself and feeling that compassion and reaching out.
How amazing would it be if more, prior to starting my firm, I worked for a company where they were starting to incorporate mindfulness practices
Mm.
into retreats and special meetings. It wasn't a consistent part of what we did within the organization. I've incorporated it into my own practice and with my clients because of what you just described. That pause gives people a chance to reset, recalibrate,
Mm.
and find that moment of ease. And how amazing would it be if organizations incorporated mindfulness and compassion into the overall ways of working? It's always like, okay, what's next? What's next? Results, results,
Mm-hmm.
results. And what ends up happening is change happens slowly, or it stalls, or people go back to their old ways of working because it's just too much and they didn't have that pause, they didn't have
Mm.
that break, they didn't have that second to think and be creative and problem solve. They were focused on the solution and not the human centric piece of kind of what together organizations are collectively trying to accomplish. So that's really neat. It's always fun too to hear, I think in my head, I was thinking, oh, a group of IT leaders, are they going to have time or want to do some sort of mindfulness practice? But clearly there's, it can connect with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to tell you, I was, I was just hanging out, in the hallway almost all day because people were coming up to me all day like, wow, that was like an amazing talk,
I love
and
that.
you can get in a talk like that, if you get 20 people that love you and like 60 people that are kind of on the fence maybe, or somewhere in the middle, and then 20 people you always somehow hate you. I don't know why, but
Right. Like,
I think pretty much, I mean, I was just getting so many great responses, and I thought this is really very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would be impressive to see, right before a major change initiative or after a difficult change, that we incorporate those types of experiences into how we meet and interact with people. What
Hmm.
about the other one that I really liked a lot, and I'd love to hear more about it, the go with intuition. And the
Mm.
reason that one called out to me, in many of the leaders that I have worked with and continue to work with, there's a big focus on the solutions and the numbers and using data to drive and inform the decision making, which
Mm.
makes a lot of sense. And at the
Yeah.
same time, that intuition piece may sometimes go in the face of data, or
Hmm.
learning how to trust your intuition as a leader can be challenging. So tell
Mm.
us a little bit about that, how we as leaders can tap into our own intuition and use it as a force for good when we're leading and guiding people, that we, in the organizations and the communities that we live and work in.
Yeah. I mean, for me, intuition is part expertise, part experience, and part values.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, so there's always, when I talk about intuition, I often get someone saying, no, it's all about the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many examples of it's not about ignoring the data. There's some examples of where the data is there, and anyone who's been in leadership positions knows the data is not going to give you 100% answer. I mean, it's very rare, because statistics is usually often not, mostly not 100%, right? That's why it's statistics. It's all about probability. Yeah. So, so you can have a high level of probability, but at the end of the day, you still have to make a decision, right? Yeah. And there's an idea of what's the ANSI model for decision making and risk is about frequency and impact. And so you have all those things you have to take care of. So, I love to talk about the Neil Armstrong moon landing, and I got two great stories in my mind. I'm going to start with that one. I got another one after if we have time.
Okay.
The Neil Armstrong moon landing. So he's, they're landing. Good old Buzz Aldrin, the character model for Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story, is sitting, co-pilot. Neil Armstrong's landing, first moon landing, and as they're going down towards landing on the moon, they're rotating the LEM, the spacecraft they were in is called the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module. And, the way they had the antenna situated, every time they moved it, like the communications would go out. So, because like it wouldn't be pointing at, it'd be like going into a tunnel.
Yeah.
So, and the computer is like throwing errors, and they're like, mission control are these errors okay? Yeah, they're okay. Just keep going, Right. Basically the computer was getting overloaded. And so finally they kind of figure that all out. And then they look down and the computer had, organized, situated their landing site in a crater of rocks.
Oh.
So that kind of wasn't going to work. Right. So they, with something like a minute to spare of fuel, they're coming to the landing site, and Neil Armstrong, his heart rate doubles, although, they're highly trained. So you listen to his speech and it's just like, oh, it's so smooth, right? He's so in control, but his heart rate is doubled. So something's going on inside him, right? And he takes control. He takes manual control of the Lunar Excursion Module. He takes it out of the computer, automated control, and he's now got a minute to land this thing manually.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Right? 250,000 miles or, away from Earth. And he has a choice to make. So, and it's seconds of a choice, right?
Right.
He can choose to land the Lunar Excursion Module in front of the crater and have more scientific significance, or be more safe and go across the crater and land on the other side. So they'll still get scientific evidence, but it won't be as scientifically significant. And he chooses, in all those split-second decisions, to be safe. I got Buzz with me. I want the mission to be a success. I don't want to take that level of risk, right? A lot of decision-making is about the risk. It's not worth the risk to go to that scientific site. I'm going to go. So how does he make that decision, right? That's a snap decision. He's looking at data. I mean, those screens, the data coming in there's a ton of data coming in there, but he's making seconds, life and death decisions. And so when you go to the the post-mortem conversations, he was saying, I chose the safer site. I had to take, but he's not he doesn't have time to think. 30. I've got 30 seconds of fuel or a minute to fuel to spare, and then eventually by the time you take control of the thing, you got 30 seconds to spare. I think they had 30 seconds left of fuel, so I think the whole thing happened within 30 seconds. You're not thinking, let me fully analyze this data. Right. Let me understand. Let me have a big conversation with my team. He's got split second. Right. He's not even thinking. He's just going boom. Right? Yeah. And he's responding. Yeah. I would say responding rather than reacting, because he's fully aware of the situation.
Right.
That comes from the values, which is my values are safety, right? Yeah. The expertise and the experience. So one is about training. So he's clearly highly trained. The number of hours they put into training is incredible. And the expertise part is before, he's an engineer again. So he's a data guy. Right. But he was a test pilot in the early 60s, late 50s, when they were losing something like 64 people a week or something like that, or 64 people a day. I forget the number. But a lot of folks just dying in, aircraft experiments. And he was in multiple situations where his aircraft, went out of control, early versions of the Lunar Excursion Module, and he brought it out. He either escaped or he brought the thing down safely, or a small crash landing. He was in the Gemini aircraft when a jet remained open, it was spinning out of control, and he brought that thing. So he had a lot of experience, and he had expertise dealing in like
Right.
today we would say VUCA, like these out of
Right.
control, unknown situations.
So from
So
that, he was able to
intuition.
draw on his intuition. Well, so as you're
Yeah.
describing this, I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense where and why he was able to do that. When I think about leaders in organizations, oftentimes they step into those roles without, having maybe some reps in doing certain things, that are required of that role.
Right.
How would you, in that situation where you don't have thousands of hours of experience, maybe you don't have any experience, there are people on your team you
Mm-hmm.
hired to bring on because they fill a skill gap or a knowledge gap that you don't have, which is fairly common in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're tasked with leading your team and making the right decisions related to a change, to a something that needs to happen. Hopefully it's not as critical as landing, on the moon. But
Right.
what advice would you give to people who don't have that level of experience, that, the mastery that you just described, but they're still being asked to do something really significant and important? How do they, where can they find intuition in those moments?
Yeah. And part of what I teach in those workshops and at Columbia is when you're dealing with completely unknown situations and you've been there
Yeah.
for the first time, part of it is becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and right. And because you're in those situations and then because what happens is if you can't kind of find a space for that, now you're just
Mm-hmm.
reacting out of fear. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is that you do have experience dealing with unknowns. You've dealt with them your whole life, right?
Yes.
And you have to pull from those experiences because
Yeah.
as a leader, you're constantly being put in front of cliffs that you have to climb that
Yeah.
you've never climbed before. It's going to
Yeah.
happen no matter how much experience you have. I mean, even Neil Armstrong had never landed on the moon before,
Good
but he
point.
pulled
Yep.
from other kinds of experience.
Yeah.
That's where I start getting into a little bit more of the body sensation thing.
Yeah.
Um, and aware, that's where to me mindfulness and embodiment really come in very helpful, because
Yeah.
situational awareness is awareness, and the mindfulness piece is a practice of awareness and staying
Yes.
centered, right? So and coming back, so as your mind drifts, come back, as your mind drifts, come back. So as
Yeah.
these, like, crisis moments are affecting you, it's like part of the practices is how well we can come back. And the moment, the mindfulness moment is really the moment you realize you've drifted and you start finding your way back again. That's that kind of like aha moment.
Yes.
And the other thing is the body sensations. And we talk about gut sense, and there are a lot of nerves that all
Mm-hmm.
come together in the gut. So that's why we feel a lot of people. But you know what? Sometimes you might feel it in your knee. Sometimes you might
Mm-hmm.
feel it in your like, why am I doing this with my shoulder? Why am
Yeah.
I feeling tense there? So, or why am I? And so part of what I practice with folks is where does it feel good? Think about good decisions you've made. Where have you
Mm-hmm.
felt those in the body? It might not be in the gut. The other story I wanted to read, and this will be a short one, but I love
Yeah.
telling
No,
the
I want to
stories,
hear it.
is David Clark, who's a serial entrepreneur, and he was flying back to Maine, where he was living at the time, and he thought, and he's an engineer, so he knows how to calculate gas fuel consumption and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason, he was looking at the dials, and he went, I know I've done a million billion flights, and I know how to calculate the gas, but something's telling me, I'm feeling like, I wonder if it's like that. I wonder if I really calculated the gas right, the fuel's consumption right this time. And then he went like, because of, and here's where the values come in. If I don't have this right, it's my family, it's my kids,
Yeah.
it's my parents, like all these people I'm affecting that I
Mm-hmm.
love, right? He goes, I don't really have a second chance at this. If I'm thinking there might be a question, I have to land and check it out, right? Even though the
Yeah.
gauges are showing me perfection. And he landed at a different airport on the way, I think at Teterboro.
Yeah.
But he landed and he checked his gas, and he was like 4 gallons short. And he's
That was
like, he
bad.
goes, if I hadn't checked that out, I would have been landing in the Bronx somewhere.
So that
But
intuition came from his values and using that as a North Star to make the decisions. I like that. That's really helpful. To
yeah,
think about that, because that, if you don't have the data, which he didn't, he wasn't sure. and he was
Yeah.
getting different information, he was able to lean on that. That's an important message for people to hear too. Because to your
Yeah.
point, you don't always, there's so many unknowns. Life is full of unknowns. Every day is going to be different. And so being able to lean into something that allows you to tap into your intuition, whether it's your experience or your core values, that's really
Yeah.
key for people to understand.
And also the knowledge that, at any moment, we're really just doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are ramifications, but if you can tap into that, I'm doing the best I can right now.
Yeah.
That doesn't alleviate you from reviewing the data and making a real decision, right? And making it even an intuitive decision. But it does allow you to know that, you're doing whatever you can to make the right decision at the time.
Yeah. That taps into that compassion piece too, having compassion
Mm-hmm.
for yourself and to what you just described. What about with, there's a couple other pieces of this framework that I'd love to ask you some questions about. And one of them, the other one is that employ action communications. That one stood out to me too. It's a neat way of, when you think about communicating, that action piece differentiates that part of the framework. Tell me a little bit about employ action communications and how leaders can utilize that component to be more effective when leading and guiding people in the organizations they work for.
I'll tell you, it comes from there's a poem by Antonio Machado, and I think it was in 1917, but the core piece of it is, we make the road by walking.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I don't think I've heard of it before, but I really love that.
And so as the things you do in the world is making the road, right? And so, you're not necessarily going on someone else's path. And the actions you take are really your message. Yeah. So that's the action communication, is whatever action you're taking. So all that decision-making stuff, all that compassion stuff, to me, it kind of all comes together here, because all of that winds up as an expression in the real world as some form of action you're taking, some form of behavior, and how it affects other folks, and so so that making the road by walking is really saying, I'm going to create something here in the real world. Not just in my head, not just in even my breathing exercises or whatever. And so there's just so many great examples. I mean, really all of the leaders, that I talk about in the book, and, so many more out in the world, you can see that their message, you can see when, if their message isn't aligned with what they're doing. Right. And you can sense a certain discomfort or dissonance there between those two things. You say, well, they kind of said this, but I kind of see them doing that. And so right away, your message becomes diluted, because why are you saying one thing and doing another thing? Now, maybe there's a reason, or maybe it's just your own confusion, but so the example in the book that I love is Shayla Murray, who's the executive vice president in charge of communications at Columbia University. Prior to that, she kind of was a pioneer in social media for creating political campaigns. And so she's all about message, right? And so two things. One is, when she came into Columbia, she had this amazingly skilled team of videographers and social media folks that she was working with. But they were slightly behind the times in what they were doing, partly because that's the way, she was brought in to help revamp, right? Change management. So this is to your point. And first thing is, she knew where she wanted to be and what the changes she wanted to make. But that would not create a innovative environment, right? Yeah. She's not teaching her team. She's telling the team what to do, and they could have easily just done it, but she wanted to create a team that was open-minded thinking and an innovative team. So that actually helps her out, right? Because now she's got a whole team of innovators working for her. Right. So she told them, instead of saying, hey, I want you to scale down the 15-minute videos to 3-minute videos, she told them, hey, go out, look at what's going on, and come back with some ideas.
Yeah.
Boom, she sets them into a learning mindset, right?
Yeah.
Open-minded mindset. And guess what? They came back with many things, and one of them is, let's make 3-minute videos instead, right? So then they did that. The Columbia website had about 8,000 hits a day. Pandemic comes, 32,000 hits a day.
Wow.
So big change. But her team was able to pivot almost immediately to create a helpful website for the community. And that's one of the things that brought 32,000 hits a day, because not only did they pivot and create, come up with ways to provide information to folks, but she also created, so this is the action part of it, she created a fund for the community from the school to give back to the community. So she just didn't go out and say, hey, community, we're here, we support you. She actually supported the community. That's the message, is the action.
Yes.
And I could see that even in there are small ways that happens. So there's a number of examples of people creating communities, and this is again, when you're doing change management, you're creating community. You're bringing a community with you. And so many great examples of people like stepping up to the plate. So, like in one case, I interviewed the leaders of the local food pantry again during the pandemic, and they had to step up to the plate because right when the pandemic hit, the leader of the pantry, who was 80 years old, decided to step down.
Oh yeah.
Someone had to step up at a time when the need increased by something like, it was over 400%.
Oh wow, yeah.
And so these two non-leaders, so part of it is, to me, is that leaders can be born. I mean, you don't have to be born into a leader, but you can be birthed, you can develop into one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they did it. I mean, they didn't start as leaders. I mean, they'd had some experience, but as this thing, they had to step up to the plate at a time when things were, they had to create, they had first go get more donations of food, and then suddenly they were getting all these donations of food. So that was a great success. But guess what? Yeah. We don't have enough refrigerators to hold all this food because we never planned for this. So they had to start making out into the community, the restaurants and all these folks who, had all these refrigerators that no longer are getting used, because their stock of food is not there. So they started implementing that, and then what food was there, they started getting donations for all the food that couldn't be used because their restaurants weren't open. So that started becoming donations. So they created this whole community of farmers and restaurants and just reaching out. Again, this whole thing about community. Yeah. There are other examples of Naimisha Murti, for example, who created Products by Women. And she started it just before the pandemic to create a community of women product managers. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And because she didn't see the community there, and she wanted the community, so stepped up to the plate. Right? There was no community. She didn't get hired as a leader. She just created this thing. Yes. And this is now, it's grown, I don't know how many people they have now, but it's worldwide, and they now have major leaders around the world that are part of this thing. And they have, after 3-4 years of this, they've now got a whole set of videos and workshops and all these things they do to reach out to the community. An amazing story of just starting, and she has this wonderful story of, she really hadn't been presenting, and but one day she was called to step up to the plate again because the person who she kind of set up to talk that day got sick, and she had to step in. She was like, oh, I don't know, I wasn't ready, and I didn't, but she just stepped up to the plate, and sometimes you just have to do that and just say, this is what it's going to be, what I have is what it's going to be. Yeah. The other one is, do we have time for one more little story in that realm?
Yes, definitely. And before you get to that story, just to sort of reiterate the points that you're sharing with the community of listeners to the Change Leader Insights podcast is, one is that action-based communications really comes through not just the messages that you're sharing, but how you share it, and then what you do on, top of the information that you're providing. So the example of the communications leader at Columbia University, how she not only invited her team to co-create the process and the solution, and then went out and then created that fund. That's a great example. And then the community piece of building community, many change management methodologies focus on activating change agents and influencers in the organization as a sort of a key way to spread change, to advance a change initiative. And so it's really important that people who are listening, that we reinforce that message. It's not a top down, the senior leader saying what to do. It's how do you activate from within so people want to willingly step up to the plate and be someone who's going to help shepherd and kind of shape the trajectory of whatever needs to be changing. But want to hear the other story that you had in mind. Would love to
hear.
And
now you've just jettisoned. It's like one of the key things there is the connection piece.
Yes, the relationship.
So it's not just coming in and I'm gonna freaking change everything. And you know what? Fear will get you a certain way. I mean, it's just like acute emergencies. Sometimes you have to take command and control, right, to save someone's life. On the flip side, it will not get you longevity, right?
Yeah.
And so if you really want to get the longevity, you want to get a corporate, a large group or a small group moving with you, bring them together, create a shared experience. You talked about it earlier that, the suffering is when you're feeling alone. Okay, so let's not suffer alone. We could even suffer together, right?
Yeah, misery loves company.
Right, exactly. The last story I'd like to share is about Ashley Wisdom.
Yeah.
So Ashley Ashley created this group and this website and this community called Health in Her Hue. And it's healthinherhue.com. And she was experiencing microaggressions at work. And she had tremendous hives, this terrible case of hives. And she went to the doctor, and it was a white doctor, and she's a black woman. And she did not feel comfortable discussing any of that bringing up the other stuff, because I'm not sure why, but I guess there was discomfort about talking. And it's not that the doctor was aggressive anyway, but she focused on here's a cream, that kind of stuff. So again, focusing on the solution versus the person. And so when she finally she quit the job, the hives almost immediately went away. I mean, pretty much immediately went away. I said almost. So subsided. So clearly there was an emotional stress from microaggression, right? And she felt that, wow, if when I went to the doctor, if I had had a black woman there, I probably would have felt, more open to speaking about it, because I would have had, again, a shared relationship, a common background.
Yeah.
And so she created Health in Her Hue to help match up, black women doctors with black women who need healthcare. And this is now turned into a major, she's now almost an institution on her own. On major panels and this kind of thing about healthcare. But it just started with her, and she was going to school at the time, I think at NYU. And at NYU, and she didn't have time to write all the content, but she just started engaging other folks, again, creating community, all working together for this common cause, to provide content, to do blogs, little newsletters and things. And it just grew from like Naimisha's website, all from scratch, all from ground zero. Now, like the other website, a major cause, major website. And she's a whole person that has many major speaking engagements, but I'm not sure that she even, I haven't asked her this, but I don't think she set out to be a major speaker. I think she set out to solve a problem. Right? And that's, I think, where all her speaking is coming from, is from internally.
Yeah. I like that story a lot, because her focus was not on, it was about helping people, helping herself, helping others who are in a similar situation. And that's, when I think about how to apply that approach to what we do as leaders of people in teams that we have, responsibility for, maybe it's reorienting not what they can do for me, right? Not what how they contribute to the bottom line, but how can I help them flourish as humans? And that's really kind of
Yeah.
what Ashley has been able to do. It sounds like, where her goal, it was, how do I help people improve their health by feeling more connected to their physicians and feeling comfortable to share. And it ended up being something so significant. So it's an important message for everyone. Focus on how you can serve others, and you'll end up serving yourself in the process, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great message. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. Well, these are a lot of really important takeaways for people who are responsible for leading teams, people, leading themselves, projects, whatever it might be in, their places of work, in their schools, and so I'm really grateful that you were able to share some of the nuggets of wisdom from your book with us. If people want to buy your book or connect with you, is LinkedIn the best place to find you, or do you want to share your website, or what's the best way to kind of
LinkedIn's
learn from you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great place. You can DM me there, all that kind of stuff. Also, douglasscherer.com is my website.
Perfect.
And all of those have links, or even on the screen. I don't know if they're going to see the screen, but Douglas.Scherer at Columbia.edu. You can reach me there. So there's a lot of ways to find me, and I'm happy to talk to folks and hear their stories as well, or if I can be of some help. Absolutely.
Yes, wonderful. Well, I look forward to continuing our conversations. I know I've got a lot more to learn from you, and I look forward to that. But thank you for making time today to connect with the Change Leader Insights community. Yeah, I'll have to bring you on in the future again, just to kind of do a check-in on how everything's going, and see what else you've been able to put out into the universe and share with us. So thank you so much,
absolutely. I'll come back
Douglas.
anytime.
All right, right on. Thanks again.
Okay.